In the past 2 episodes, we have investigated the potential dangers of the online world. We discussed how to promote safe technology with Chris McKenna in episode 39, and looked at the effects of pornography on our world with Joe Madison in episode 40. Today, we talk to a mother who has fought the tech trap with her daughter.
I, quickly learned that she had been viewing pornography and had been on adult websites as well as pictures and videos, etc. And so in that moment, it was very clear to me that my daughter had been robbed of her innocence, and as a result, I had been robbed of her. Later on, 2 years later, I would discover that this had all started actually at the age of 10.
At the age of 10.
Mm-hmm. And I actually thought I had only caught it like 6 months, that it had only been going on for, say, 6 months. She was clearly on a very dangerous road, and like I said, I felt like her life was in danger. Later on, I also discovered that we had missed a predator picking her up, and the only reason we had missed it was that she didn't have the correct address of where she was at that moment.
Today on The Balanced Voice, Rania welcomes Deborah Berry, mother, advocate, and author of The TechTrap. Deborah started her journey to write The TechTrap as a personal effort to absorb what had happened to her daughter and to gain information about technology and teens. As she continued researching, her mission evolved to equip parents with knowledge and awareness of the strangers who seek to gain a connection with their child through technology. We are grateful to learn from her on today's episode. So without further ado, here's your host, Rania Mancarios.
Welcome to the Balanced Voice podcast. As always, we're thrilled to have today's guest with us in studio, Deborah Berry. Deborah, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for having me today.
We're so excited. Deborah is actually the author of The TechTrap, a mom's fight for her daughter and a world of modern technology. Such an important conversation. So we've spent the last 2 weeks talking to experts about the online world. And this is a conversation, it's an ongoing conversation for us on the Balanced Voice podcast, because I think modern day technology mixed with modern day parenting is one of the most difficult things on earth. Your story is so compelling because you actually found that your 12-year-old had gained access to pornography.
Right.
And it was changing her life and potentially setting her up for something extremely dangerous. Tell us about your story.
Well, back in 2016, I was checking my daughter's social media. She was 12 years old at the time, as most parents do. I'm checking the Instagram, I'm checking the emails, the texting, so on and so forth. And that particular day, I actually happened to do something different, which I looked back into her photo library. And I really did it for my own amusement. I was just kind of killing time. But I looked back, and I kept going back further and further and further until I came across some screenshots that all of a sudden I realized were not people that I recognized the names. And there was language being used that I didn't even know. Frankly, my daughter didn't even know those words as far as I knew. Mm-hmm. And so in that moment, it was very clear to me that my daughter had been robbed of her innocence, and as a result, I had been robbed of her. So I understood that that was the tip of the iceberg and that I needed to look a little deeper. And so I really did not know how to resurrect the past from her computer. So I have an older child who, when she came home from college, helped me dive in there and resurrect this.
Which was also so interesting to me, because as parents, we have a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to technology. And I thought it was so wonderful that you accessed your other child to help you dive in.
So she was able to resurrect the past, and I, quickly learned that she had been viewing pornography and had been on adult websites as well as pictures and videos, etc. So in that moment, my world kind of crashed on me, and I really honestly did not know what to do. I felt like her life was in imminent danger, although I had no proof of that at the time. Later on, 2 years later, I would discover that this had all started actually at the age of 10.
At the age of 10.
Mm-hmm. And I actually thought I had only caught it like 6 months, that it had only been going on for, say, 6 months. But anyway, it had actually started at age 10. And so she was clearly on a very dangerous road. And like I said, I felt like her life was in danger. Later on, I also discovered that we had missed a predator picking her up. And the only reason we had missed it was that she didn't have the correct address of where she was at that moment. So,
well, I want to ask you about it, but, of course, only share what you want to share. But so a 10-year-old having access to pornography is every 10-year-old in America or across the globe with a phone or any type of online capability.
Right.
Unfortunately, this is the reality of the world we live in. How did it escalate? How did you find that it escalates from viewing pornography to actually engaging with predators? I mean, did they meet on chat rooms?
Yes. I believe what happened was, and I still don't know the bottom of this barrel.
Okay.
But what I believe happened is that they would connect with her on social media and then take her off site into either onto her own phone number, doing a messaging back and forth, or to even a different site altogether. The online predators are very complicated. It's not like one creepy guy crosses the path of your kid. They're very sophisticated systems with very different levels in that system, and I know you know this, but the kid doesn't know that. The kid thinks it's the same boyfriend or the same friend the whole time, and they're being groomed, and then when they get comfortable, they're being passed along to another person who's taking them further. And it's difficult to understand, but the pressure and the manipulation of that is so complex and deep. It is very difficult for a young person to be able to resist that. And then, as we know, if they get into it, it's not exactly something she's going to come running to me and saying, "Hey, Mom, it's we've been somewhere we shouldn't have been." And so that's another complexity.
So she was out and had supplied the address of where she was to a potential predator?
She was going to, but she had the incorrect address, so the connection never took. I found that out later.
I can't even imagine if that connection had.
Right. So that instinct and that intuition that I felt on the front end was absolutely correct, although I had no proof of this at all until later, and it was in hindsight. I was very grateful that I did act on
your instinct.
On my instincts, right. So what happened was I knew I had to do something with her immediately for her safety, for her behavior spiraling out of control, all of these things. So I, through a process, identified a wilderness program for her, which I put her into. And
at the age of 12?
At the age of 12.
Yep.
It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Very painful. So I put her in the wilderness program, and I think sometimes there's a misconception. I did it at the summertime, so she was there for 3 months. Did not get to speak to her for 3 months. It was difficult.
Very.
But you think that if they've been in a program for 3 months, at the end of that time, we're all fixed, we're going to go back home, go back to school. But honestly, it's really the beginning, because they have just barely tapped what's gone on with her, and you're not going to put her back into the situation that she had been in and let this whole thing come unraveled.
Did you find, had she shared photos of herself and videos of herself? And if so, was there an effort to remove those from the online world? Can you even do that?
Okay. No. Yes, she did.
Okay.
And no, I did not.
Okay.
Because in that moment of crises,
yes,
my head is on fire, right?
Yes.
So it's
and
either,
you talk about that in the book so beautifully.
Thank you. So either I'm going to address her needs immediately, or I'm going to chase down the predator. And in my way of thinking, for every predator you put down, another pops up, even if you can find them.
Exactly.
Right? So
that's exactly right.
All my energy, all my money, all of my thoughts everything was directed at how to save her, what to do for her. And the wilderness decision kind of came down to either losing her to the sex trade or having a chance to find her in the wilderness.
Wilderness program, 3 months. She came out of it. You realized, okay, we have more work to do.
Right.
So she went on another, was it boarding school after that?
She went to a therapeutic boarding school for middle school girls.
Okay.
And that was 7th and 8th grade, which in the United States, there's not really a whole lot of those.
No, there isn't.
And the reason why is because a lot of times parents, they'll wait until a kid's really on fire, like drinking or drugs, or in other words, there's absolutely no more options, right? So in this case, it was sort of more of a proactive situation. And one of the questions I had as I was trying to figure this out, was I killing a mosquito with a sledgehammer? Am I overreacting? Because she is the victim, right?
Yes.
She has not done all these things yet. But I felt like I had to do it. And so one of the pieces of advice that I had gotten was that the earlier you start, the more time you have until they're 18, because as the parent, you have an opportunity to decide what programs they go to and how this is going to do.
Right.
At the age of 18, they can walk out.
Yes.
You have no control over them.
Exactly.
So based on that, I decided that it was smart to go forward. In hindsight, I'm so grateful that I did, because I understood as I went through the therapeutic boarding school process with her how much we avoided. In other words, we had our share of problems, but our problems could have been so much greater if I had waited.
So wilderness to the boarding school, and then there was one more.
Right. She went from a middle school boarding school to a therapeutic high school.
Okay.
Because she simply was getting older and needed to go into the therapeutic, the high school grade.
What was interesting in the book is you talk about her 17th birthday. She's come home.
Right.
You're rediscovering your daughter.
Right.
And she asks for a cell phone.
Right.
And when you wrote that, it was like the first time it dawned on me that she hasn't had a cell phone. I mean, I think I knew it, but when I heard that was her wish, I was like, wait a minute, she's been without a cell phone.
Right.
From 12.
From the minute she went to the wilderness to the minute she came home.
12 years to 17.
Yes.
There was music given to her at one point.
She earned an iPod.
Which I loved. What was so interesting is you talked about the music you even put on it. And I thought that it's so fascinating because you actually have to be so selective because our music is so hypersexualized.
Right.
80s, 70s, 60s.
Yes.
How did she respond to that? I'm just curious. Was she like, Mom, this isn't what I expected? Or
she was grateful to have the iPod. She didn't say anything. Yeah, she was grateful to have the iPod.
Okay, so now she gets the cell phone at 17, and it is so interesting. She's been without the technology that long. And I actually think what's so nice about what you've done and the outline you've put in this book, the TechTrap, which is just such a phenomenal read, is you really, did you kill a mosquito with a sledgehammer? I don't think so. I think as parents, we have to go above and beyond to protect our children. And the fact that you were able to protect her and guard her, restore her and build her, and the way you have is so phenomenal, because we unfortunately see the flip side where parents didn't catch it, didn't see it, didn't know this could even happen, and then end up losing a child. Right. Truly, to a predator, a trafficker, to a life enslaved, to suicide, to more.
Right.
Because this becomes very destructive. Now, you talk about your young child, 10 to 12 years old, being angry. Mm-hmm. Was that a sign to you that something was not right early on?
I think in hindsight, I would connect that to the pornography that she had been viewing early on. She was already a spirited kid, and I don't really know exactly where all the anger came from, but I do feel like it was accelerated by what she was watching. I don't really know for sure.
There's a passage in the book that you wrote that just moved me to tears. So she's back in the home, and you said, I would stare at her as if I was seeing her for the first time. I studied her features and found myself in her face. She was no longer a child, but a young adult whose eyes were filled with knowing. Her physical presence was strong and confident. She was unassuming, yet difficult to read, which I love that sentence. At the same time, she was authentically powerful, and on the rare occasion she chose to offer it, her smile could light up a room. I mean, I read that and I just thought it was the most beautiful passage. And I know that your daughter now is thriving and doing incredibly well. And you, through this tragedy, actually have learned so much and created such a resource for parents. So talk to us about what you're hoping to do now and what you're hoping to accomplish by sharing your story.
Well, the book was originally written around the technology part of it. And like you mentioned earlier, during her time away, it was almost 4 years, it's about 3.5 years that she was gone. She did not have technology, so other than the iPod we mentioned. So basically she was put on what I was calling technological ice. So I understood that she would be coming out of the boarding school, coming home, and there would be no way I could control this environment. And really all it would take would be for her to step out on, the street, and who knows what could happen, right? So I was very panicky about that. So I decided the one thing I could do would be to research technology and find out what I wanted her to know before she came out of the boarding school. So I didn't know exactly what it was that I wanted her to know. So I ended up just hitting the internet. And I ended up with a pile of research that about blew my mind. And so I started dividing them into groups, and I thought I'm just going to go through all of these with her. And when she comes out, if she makes a bad decision, at least it's an informed bad decision. So that was for my personal purpose, was to use this with her.
Internally, you and her.
Right. That was how this whole thing started. And so, but the body of work was so compelling, it really felt wrong to not share the information, because while we know a lot of things, right, when you look at it as a whole, it's very numbing to see the power of this technology and giving it to our children and all the things that can happen. So that ended up being the second part of the books, but I went through and I wrote the first part of the book, which was my perspective as a mom. And what happens from the moment you find this stuff on her cell phone and your world turns upside down and you don't know what to do and you don't know who to talk to, what questions to ask. And you certainly don't go running to anybody because it's embarrassing, it's shameful.
Yeah.
And it's not something a lot of people really want to talk about. So that's the first part of the book, was what you're going to go through. I mean, if you are in this situation, your story's not going to look exactly like mine. But I would say a lot of these feelings are going to be very much the same. Yeah. You're going to probably blame yourself. You're going to question yourself. You're going to want to lay down and not fight. It's very hard. It takes tremendous guts, courage, and staying power, because it's not something that's over with in a short period of time. That's another thing I think people don't necessarily understand. This is a long process. Yeah. This is not just, 3 months and we're all good.
When you say you blame yourself, as parents, we blame ourselves for everything. But at the same time, your book talks about persuasive technology.
Yes.
And the way these tech giants have built this technology where it's not a fair fight. And what I thought was so compelling is, again, I keep saying the book, it's the TechTrap, on page 154 and 155, my goodness, through 156. You literally go through, what do the tech giants actually do when it comes to technology and their own children?
Right.
I loved, Steve Jobs, CEO of Apple until his death, 2012, prohibited his children from using the newly released iPad. Bill Gates banned smartphones at the table, placed time limits on screen time, did not provide kids a phone until 14, and allowed no tech in the bedroom. Tim Cook Apple products are not meant for constant use. Susan Hobbs banned her daughter from social media until 16. So we give them to our children. All of us do at a young age. Our children fall victim to, all of them do, to terrible situations in varying degrees, and then we feel guilty. But at the same time, the very creators of the software who know how dangerous it is,
right,
have kept it completely away. So, like, I mean, it's a very interesting thing to think about.
That was in the research. That was probably one of the parts that just absolutely floored me the most. I did not know anything. I'd never even heard the word persuasive technology. And I thought, when I first saw that word, that it had to do with being persuaded to a point or a decision, right? It's not that at all.
No.
It is an actual manipulation and a configuration to alter human thoughts and behaviors, and it's done on purpose.
Yes. Yes.
So when I figured that out or read this, I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And then the next thing I find out is that they don't put their kids in schools that have technology.
Isn't it unbelievable?
They don't allow it until high school. And the reason why is because the brain's developing and they don't want it to get in the way of the development of the
prefrontal cortex.
Yes. That and the cognitive thinking, because it does change how our kids are wired. And I think any of us can look at our children and see these little tiny subtleties of how they relate. They're,
I was just researching about brain development and social media use and technology use, and what was so fascinating is that there's a lot of research that shows that synapses they no longer fire. The connections start to die down when kids spend so much time glued to technology and not using other parts of their brain, cognitive skills and development.
Right.
Even just being outside. They don't have to be building, robots. I'm just saying the normal things that kids do: reading, coloring, playing, art, sports. Athena Chavaria, I'm not going to say it right, former executive assistant, said, this is one of the tech giants. I am convinced the devil lives in our phones and is wreaking havoc on our children. And I always say it's not about phones, it's about online access. So that can be a cell phone, it can be a smartphone, it can be an iPad, it can be, a number of things. You talk about, again, the book is just filled with so much, avoiding this. I mean, you've learned so much. On page 209, I love this. We put out to our followers this morning that we were going to be talking to you. And a lot of the questions came back with, okay, what do we do now? How do we keep our kids?
The $95,000 question. So, well, you do the obvious things, of course, using parental controls, paying attention, checking their technology, all of these things. But in hindsight, probably there's two things that stand out to me. One of them is I would delay tech. I would flat out delay the tech, which I think is super difficult to do.
Yeah.
Because we live in it, right?
Yeah.
We all live in it. And
especially post-COVID.
Right. And it's a demand that we go online and that we do our schoolwork or our business or whatever it is that we do, right? But if you can delay the technology, your child, and not give them a cell phone until they're, say, 16 years old, they would have just that much more development that might help them make a better decision. I'll admit it, I gave my daughter a smartphone at age 10. I mean, I considered it, a rite of passage. Oh, we're double digits now,
I think done elementary. Going into 6th grade, most kids get their first phones at age 10, 11,
right,
between 5th and 6th grade.
Right. And then it was selfish, too. It was, if I need her to let her know I'm doing something, or anyway, it's just, didn't really do it with a lot of thought particularly. But anyway, I would definitely delay the tech as much as possible. And the other thing I think is so interesting is that mothers with babies, right, we have our little iPads or whatever and loaded up with our games and stuff. And even though they're not necessarily connecting with pornography and other things like that, right there, you start that addictive process by...
And I'm guilty of that. 3 little kids, flights.
Right. We
dinner, listen, sweetheart, don't you want to play the game, the monkey game where you can drag the letters and...
Right. So that's one thing. Another thing I would say is never behind a closed door.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think another critical mistake that I made was, it's so easy to do it, right? Because it's our alarm clock, it's our weather, it's our news, it's everything. And we go to bed with our cell phones, most of us do. Or in some instances, the kids are doing the homework online, therefore they want to go in a quiet spot to do their homework and shut the door, right? So I would never allow it behind a closed door. When she came home at age 16 and a half, I did not give her another cell phone until she was 17. And at that point, I made her keep it outside of the bedroom door. And she goes like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
I'm like,
"No, I'm not.
As long as you live with me, I think we just have to put this outside the door. That's the only way I can deal with it." And so it is outside the door every night. And it does give me comfort to know it's outside the door.
Yes, of course.
So those are 2 very important things. And I do also feel like... for all the legislature that we can put out there, all the blocks we can make, for every hole you can plug, another one springs.
Exactly.
And so to me, you're never going to, there's never going to be a 100% answer to stopping this. So I think the parents have to get involved. The parents have to take back parenting.
Yeah.
They have to be willing to be the odd man out. They have to be willing to set the rules for their kids and follow those rules. They also need to educate their children about all the things that can happen, and it's not pretty.
It's not pretty.
No,
that's the hardest. Sorry, but that's one of the things we do, obviously, so actively here. And I'll tell you, even just a few years ago, when we try to get into a school or a community, it was so interesting. They'd say, "But we have such good kids. We're really we're kind of a top-notch community," or "This is a top-notch school," or "We're a gated home." And I kept thinking that has nothing to do.
It has nothing to do
with the online world and safety.
With
Literally
having a
nothing.
good kid.
Nothing. I mean, you have perfect children. I mean, it has nothing to do with that. Predators will find them. Content will come their way.
Right.
And one of the things I love that you said is we have to teach them, yes, delay technology, but ultimately technology is going to make its way into their lives.
Right.
We've got to teach them how to handle it.
True. Education and awareness. We're not going to put that tech genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
I would love to stuff that tech genie back in the bottle because I do feel like it has cheated our children out of their childhood.
For sure.
And I think it's taken a lot away from our society, although I will say I do like my Google Maps and things like this. So that it does have, it has its place and we all use it. But in terms of entertainment for our children, I think it's really harming them.
My kids will say, "But Mom, you're always on your phone." I say, "Well, first of all, don't compare me to you."
Right.
I'm not going through development. I'm cooked and done,
Yes.
You are still growing. You are still growing. So I love how you opened the book by saying, I looked up a recipe. I went on Google Maps. I researched our next trip. Like there's wonderful uses, but we know how to use it safely and responsibly, whereas our kids don't. I love in Paige, just to answer those moms who had asked us, Deborah actually has 6 steps that she recommends to keep kids safe online, and one of them, have all passwords and check up on them. I think that's huge.
It is, and it is, again, it's one of those things, guilty. I can't keep up with all my own passwords.
I know.
So trying to keep up with my children's passwords, the family passwords, all the passwords, I don't know. But you do need to develop some sort of a system for keeping up with your passwords. One thing my daughter did once she did get the cell phone back, the smartphone back, was she put in my password. So I always know her.
Oh, that's very smart.
Yeah, so that works very well. So I don't have to remember her password, but there would be a second side to that, that means she also has my password.
Yeah.
But I have control of my phone.
Exactly. So did you see that as a potential negative? That she had your password, or
well, I don't want her on my phone necessarily, right?
Okay. Oh, there you go.
But no, it made it easier, and so we just keep it that way, and she's not busy changing her password every 2 seconds and so forth. So that's just sort of the agreement. In fact, it was her suggestion. I think she did that to make me feel better, and it works.
What is so compelling about your story is, again, we talk about this all the time, and while we talk about it, hearing from someone that's actually experienced the dangers and the warnings we've been talking about is really important. Good family or not, loving parents or not, great neighborhood or not, none of that matters in the online world. Your book really walks us through that. Your daughter's story, while so difficult, also is one of hope and redemption and healing, and you can overcome this. Learning about the schools and the different strategy you used, it was just wonderful. And all of the content for staying safe online was great. I want to read this one sentence in a letter you wrote to her. It said, "In an instant, you were robbed of your innocence and I was robbed of you. But yet you've regained each other in such a beautiful way." And I think that's the most beautiful part of your story.
Thank you. And oddly enough, I think that the pandemic, because she came home during the pandemic,
I thought that was so interesting.
Was a blessing.
Godsend.
It really was.
I thought of that.
Because she couldn't go in. I mean, it wasn't even on me. Sorry, you can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And it put us in a very close space together, night and day, basically. You know, when I took her to the wilderness, she was 12 and a half years old. And when she came back home, she was 16 and a half. And of course, I saw her, throughout this whole time. But you're not parenting on a daily, hour-to-hour basis. So it's like I had to remember I was not parenting this 12-year-old that I left off in the woods that was losing control of herself or whatever. So just the rebuilding of the relationship to a large degree. And I would tell her, I said, you need to be patient with me. I'm having to relearn who you are.
Yeah.
And she was not the same person. And anyway, thank goodness for that. But
no, my father has always said the love you have for your children is painful. And I understood that when I had kids. Obviously, you'll do anything to protect them. And the lengths you went to protect her are so commendable.
Thank you. I didn't feel like I had a choice. I mean, that was my heart. It's my children. And, I really had to set aside. I couldn't worry about what other people were thinking or saying or their opinions about it. I just had to do what I knew I had to do. And that was at a great cost. It might not have turned out well. You never know.
You never know. You don't want to know.
We might have the relationship might have been permanently damaged by me taking her to the woods and then on to therapeutic boarding school. I mean, I saw families like that where the bonds they were broken. And so you had to be prepared for all of those things and be willing to make that sacrifice in order to save her. And yes.
And thank God you did. And I'm sure she's so thankful you did. Deborah Berry, the TechTrap. How do we find you, get copies of your book?
You can find me on Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. Also, I have a website, which is thetechtrapmovement.com. You have to get the in there, or it won't pop up. I've got to work on that. But you can get the book there. You'll find out a little bit more about me and what I'm, where I'd like to take this.
So we're so happy. Thank you for spending time with us on the Balanced Voice podcast. And to all of you who joined us today, send us your thoughts, comments, subscribe, stay with us, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to today's Balanced Conversation. You can find real solutions and tangible resources in our show notes at thebalancedvoicepodcast.com. To join the conversation, follow us on Instagram at The Balanced Voice Podcast and on Twitter at @BalancedVoice_. Stay up to date on Rania's work by following her at The Rania Report, and we can't wait to see you next week for another Balanced Conversation.